No camera recorded the burning of the Library of Alexandria. No microphone captured the final hours of Pompeii. Almost everything that has ever happened on Earth happened without a single frame of footage. But what if that could change? What if an artificial intelligence could take every surviving clue that a lost event left behind? Every ruin, every letter, every scar left in the rock, and generate the closest thing humanity has ever had to a recording of the past? This is a story about the year 2073 and a strange new kind of history. To understand how this might work, we first need to understand a piece of technology that is only just being born in our own time. It is called a world model. Most people have seen artificial intelligence that can write sentences, or paint pictures, or answer questions. A world model is something different. It is an AI that learns how the world behaves and evolves. Think about what happens in your own mind when someone knocks a cup off the edge of a table. You don't need to watch it fall to know what comes next. You already know it will drop, hit the floor, and shatter. You know the water inside will spill outward across the ground, not leap upward toward the ceiling. You have never studied the physics of a falling cup, and yet you can picture the entire event before it happens. You can do this because your brain carries a kind of model of the world inside it. A lifetime of watching things fall, splash, roll, and break has quietly taught you the rules, even though nobody ever wrote them down for you. A world model is an attempt to give that same intuition to a machine. Instead of just memorizing facts, it learns patterns of cause and effect. It learns that heavy things fall, that shadows follow the sun, that cloth folds and drapes, that crowds flow and scatter in certain ways. Once an AI holds a model like this, it can imagine scenes that no one ever filmed and keep them consistent with the way reality actually works. In 2026, world models are young and clumsy. They can generate short video clips that look real for a few seconds, before objects melt into one another or drift out of shape. They grasp a little about gravity and motion, but they are still easily fooled. Now imagine almost 50 years of steady progress. Not magic, and not science fiction, just the same kind of improvement we have already watched unfold decade after decade. By 2073, a world model might hold a far deeper understanding of physics, of materials, of language, and of how human beings behave. It might be able to simulate not a few flickering seconds, but long, stable, detailed scenes that stay faithful to the rules of the real world from beginning to end. That is the tool our future historians will reach for. Here is the idea at the heart of our story. In 2073, a historian sits down to study an event that no one ever recorded. Perhaps a battle, a vanished city, a single lost day. They gather everything that survived: crumbling ruins, faded letters, weather scratched into the pages of old journals, bones pulled from the earth, hand-drawn maps, the remembered words of people who were there. Then they feed all of it into a multimodal world model and they ask a simple question. Given these clues, what could have happened here? The AI does not simply replay the evidence. It uses everything it knows about the world to fill the enormous gaps between the clues, and it generates a possible version of the event, a sequence of images showing how that lost moment might truly have looked. To do this well, the system has to weave together many different threads at once. Archeology tells it where the walls once stood and what tools people held in their hands. Climate and weather data tell it whether the sky should hang heavy with rain or burn bright with drought. The study of old buildings tells it how the rooftops were shaped and how the streets were laid out. Surviving clothing tells it what people wore, how the fabric fell, and what colors they were actually able to make. Language tells it what they might have said to one another. And everything we understand about human behavior tells it how a crowd would move, how a child would cling to a parent, how a soldier would carry his fear. No single clue is enough on its own. But layered together, thread over thread, they begin to constrain the picture, narrowing the endless space of what might have been into something far smaller and far more likely. And yet, even with all of that, the evidence is never quite enough to point to a single answer. This is the most important idea in the entire story, so it is worth slowing down for. The past is like a finished puzzle from which almost every piece has been lost. A small handful of pieces remain, scattered across the table, and from those few fragments, you have to guess the whole picture. But several very different pictures could fit the same scattered pieces equally well. So a careful world model would not hand us one confident movie of the past, as though it had stood there with a camera. Instead, it would generate many possible versions of the same event. In one, the city falls to fire. In another, to flood. In another, its people simply gather their belongings and walk away. Each version would remain honest about the fact that it is only one path among many that the evidence still allows. This is where physics becomes a kind of referee. Out of all the versions an AI could dream up, a great many are simply impossible. A wall cannot be left standing if we have dug it out of the ground in scattered pieces. A fire cannot spread against the very wind that was recorded blowing that day. A shadow cannot stretch toward the east while the sun is climbing in the east as well. By testing each imagined scene against the hard rules of the physical world, the system can throw out the reconstructions that break those rules. Physics can never tell us exactly what happened, but it is remarkably good at telling us what could not have happened, and every impossible version it removes carries us a little closer to the truth. Still, even the versions that survive contain a mixture of two very different things. Some details in a reconstruction rest firmly on evidence. We found the sword, so the sword is real. We measured the wall, so the wall is real. But other details are inventions, reasonable guesses the AI made simply to fill the empty space. The color of a merchant's coat, the expression on a stranger's face, the particular shape of the clouds that afternoon. An honest system would never blur those two things together. It would keep careful track of which details are anchored in something we genuinely found, and which are only plausible imagination, so that no one ever mistakes a guess for a fact. And it could go one step further. It could show that uncertainty directly, painted into the image itself. Picture a reconstruction where the things we are sure of appear solid and sharp: the standing stones, the river, the walls we actually excavated, and the things we are only guessing at appear softer, dimmer, almost translucent, quietly marked as uncertain. A viewer could glance at a single frame and instantly see the difference between what history knows and what the machine has merely imagined. Uncertainty would no longer be buried in footnotes. It would be visible right there in the picture, honest and unmistakable. Let me show you how all of this might work, using a real mystery, one that has puzzled people for more than 400 years. In 1587, more than 100 English settlers, men, women, and children, built a small colony on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. Their governor sailed back to England for supplies. When he finally managed to return 3 years later, the entire colony had vanished. The houses were gone. There were no bodies and no sign of a battle. The only clue left behind was a single word, carved into a wooden post: Croatoan. To this day, no one knows for certain what became of them. Did they starve? Were they killed? Did they leave to live among the indigenous people of nearby Croatoan Island? The mystery has never been solved. Now imagine handing this puzzle to a world model in 2073. It would draw on the archeology from the site, every nail and shard of pottery ever recovered. It would draw on the rings of ancient cypress trees, which quietly record that those exact years brought the worst drought the region had seen in centuries. It would draw on the maps, the letters, the colony's dwindling stores of food, and everything known about the peoples who lived along that coast. And it would not give us one answer. It would give us several. A version where drought and hunger drive the colonists to abandon their walls. A version where they are welcomed into a neighboring community and slowly become part of it. A version where conflict brings their story to an end. Each one physically possible. Each one weighed against the evidence. Each one honest about its own uncertainty. For the first time, we could see these competing possibilities not as dry theories in a book, but as worlds we could look upon with our own eyes. But here we arrive at the shadow that falls across this entire idea, the danger we have to be honest about. Of all those competing versions, one of them will always be the most beautiful, the most dramatic, the most cinematic. And human beings do not truly remember evidence. We remember stories. We remember the image that moved us. So there is a very real risk that the most emotionally powerful reconstruction, and not the most accurate one, becomes the version everybody remembers. A stunning, tragic, unforgettable scene could quietly overwrite the uncertain truth until millions of people feel certain they know exactly how a lost event unfolded, when in reality, they are only remembering the most convincing piece of fiction a machine ever made. The very tool we built to recover history could end up rewriting it. Not with lies exactly, but with beautiful, plausible guesses that come to feel more real than the fragile facts underneath them. And this is not some distant worry. We can already see the seeds of the problem in the AI of today. In 2026, our image and video models routinely get history wrong. They blend different centuries together into a single frame. They invent grand buildings that never existed. They dress people in clothing from the wrong era or the wrong continent entirely. And most tellingly of all, when asked to show the past, they often imitate famous movies rather than the actual historical record, because they learned from our films just as much as from our facts. They hand us Hollywood, dressed up as memory. If we cannot yet trust these systems to get a simple scene right, then we must stay humble and careful about how much we allow ourselves to trust their grander reconstructions in the years to come. So what should we make of all this? The dream is genuinely beautiful. To stand, at last, in the final hours of Pompeii. To watch the lost colonists of Roanoke make their final choice. To recover, out of dust and silence, the moments that shaped us and were never written down. A well-built world model could become one of the most powerful instruments for understanding our own past that we have ever created. But its power is exactly why we have to hold on to one simple distinction: the difference between what happened and what merely could have happened, between the history we have earned through evidence and the beautiful possibilities a machine can imagine. The future may let us see the past as never before, and it will be up to us to remember that seeing is not the same as knowing, and that the most convincing picture is not always the true one.